All right, welcome back to the Playbook. I'm Taylor Mounts. I'm really happy to be joined today by Jim Etzel, CEO of Sport Oregon, the engine behind major events, partnerships, and economic impact throughout the state. Today, we're talking sports tourism, event strategy, leadership, and what the future of regional sports organizations looks like. So, Jim, thanks so much for joining.
Yeah, Taylor, thanks for having me.
I've had the pleasure of not only working with you, but knowing you for quite a long time. And what I can say is I really have appreciated our friendship, both personally and professionally. And I want to give some background for you. And you've obviously had an accomplished career of like being born into a sports family with your dad was the athletic director at University of Portland. Take me through growing up in that sense and how it's shaped you throughout your career of all the magnificent things you've done.
Yeah, I don't know. I just growing up the son of a coach and an athletic administrator, athletic director, that was for me was pretty special. And he stayed in one place his entire career at University of Portland, which he had some opportunities to go elsewhere. But if I stop and think about if he would have taken those opportunities and we started bouncing it as a family, whether I've had the kind of the same professional outcomes or family being different. So I think that to me, it was a blessing that he stayed in Portland and I was exposed to so many things from growing up all the way through high school and college and then post college as I started my career. I didn't start in sports actually. I wanted to be in sports, the business of sports. But when I graduated, the industry was really not even a fraction of what it is today. So I guess that just says I'm old guy, but no, vibe and young. But the no, when I graduated in 1985, I took the Portland Trailblazers as an example. There was the front office then was probably 30 people max. Today, what are they, 250 to 300? And by the late 90s, there's just the whole business of an enterprise around professional franchises had evolved dramatically around, especially on the commercial side of the business and television rights and everything else that go along with that. And there just weren't, it's still a very tough job market for people wanting to get into it. A lot of people go to grad school or undergrad focused on sports marketing degrees, et cetera, different facets of it. And the job placement's still probably around 10 or 15%. It was probably the same back then. And maybe sports at that time hadn't identified themselves as I don't want to call it the sexiest place to be, but as dynamic as it is today. And then the sports product universe, which is a whole nother industry within sports. Nike in 1985 was just starting to emerge. And if you read Shoe Dog and things like that, even when they built the original portion of their global campus now, they built it in a fairly conservative manner because they weren't certain that they were going to be around forever. Was it still a sustainable business and all that? So it's just really interesting to step back and wind back almost 4 decades now to see where it was then and where it is today. I had an opportunity to go to grad school at Ohio University or at USC to get a master's in sports marketing. Like I just paused because I looked at the placement rates and you invest 2 years of money and time and what's there. And then I just mentors talked to me like because there wasn't a lot of things to point to as trajectories inside the industry unless I wanted to be in college sports. And even then, another world then, it was pretty small. And I was encouraged to pursue, I became a commodities broker and
Did you really? I didn't know that.
yeah, I was a lumber broker for the one of the oldest lumber brokerage firms in the country at the time, but a very small company. They had done everything from the Hoover Dam to San Francisco Golden Gate Bridge, Bay Bridge, where they supplied all the lumber and just smiled and dialed, learned to be a salesperson. It was all over the phone. There were no laptops then. I had the Rolodex and I was in some ways a little bit of a storm chaser. Like you see a tornado and Oklahoma, we start calling the lumber yards within a 50-mile radius. You got to send them shingles and sticks and 2x4s and dimensional lumber to make the repairs, stuff like that. Just learn to be enterprise oriented, sales, opportunistic, that type of deal. And but I still had that urge to be in sports. And so I decided, I looked around, I said, I gotta scratch this itch now. Otherwise, I'll probably be at a point in life where I can't go back and try to get into it. Ironically, I left the commodities business in lumber and then went to work in sports out of all places, a major lumber company, timber company, Louisiana Pacific Corporation, which
Oh, gotcha. Yeah.
and Harry Merlo, the CEO, he was a huge sports guy and owned the Portland Timbers back in the day, but also was the primary partner of the U.S. Davis Cup. He was the presenting sponsor of Davis Cup and globally, and also was a USOC ring sponsor. So they did a lot of tennis exhibitions, a lot with Nike international tennis exhibitions in Portland and LA and up and down the coast. And then they had a professional tournament, the Louisiana Pacific Invitational, that was kind of a second tier professional event. Actually, Boris Becker won his very first tournament, professional tournament at the LPI in Portland at the Child Center back in 1985 or six. I can't
That's a good
remember.
trivia question. That's
A good
good.
trivia question. And then there's Davis Cup ties hosted here and elsewhere. They also did a lot with some of the U.S. Olympic federations, USA Volleyball, USA Hockey, etc. And we put on USA Wrestling put on a lot of USA versus USSR type exhibitions around the country, and cut my teeth on being a promoter and four-walling events and putting all the from the ticketing package to the arena deal together to local advertising, and then going on a 4 or 5 city tour with the events. And then that eventually led to the predecessor company to Peter Jacobson Productions. Peter Jacobson, PGA Tour professional, had this event called the Fred Meyer Challenge, which at the time was the largest non-sanctioned golf event in the world. And it grew to be 24 of the biggest names of golf. But when I started in the third year of the event, 1987, 88, it was 16 professional. It was Arnold Palmer, Jack Nicklaus, Freddie Couples, Guy, Greg Norman. You go down the list, it was all Hall of Fame golfers that played in this thing. And pretty incredible experience. Worked with him for 7 years. Got to work on the skins game at its peak when it was at Bighorn, and just being in these different environments, both from a sales perspective, sponsorship, which I was a sponsorship guy. That was my opportunity. Then I got added to that kind of business development, seeing opportunities that were outside of that Fred Meyer Challenge that fit the profile of the agency that they could execute and do. So it could be anything from putting on a Canadian Football League game at Civic Stadium in Portland that was the Calgary Stampeders versus the Toronto Argonauts, because CFL was looking at putting a franchise in Portland. And so we did a Doug Flutie versus Rocket Ismail matchup. It's always been a great hockey town. So I was pretty good friends. I developed a relationship through the tennis stuff at LP with Jeannie Buss. We were both the same
Oh,
age,
wow.
same age. And so she called me one day about, hey, you should do an NHL exhibition in Portland with the Kings and the Canucks. And I was like, well, why would I do that? Yeah. And she laughed and she goes, I know they both are pretty bad teams, aren't they? And I go, yeah, yeah. But I said, it would sell tickets. It'd probably break even. I go, but she goes, my dad owns a team. And I said, yeah, duh. And and she goes, you know who my best friend is? And I said, yeah, Janet Jones. You introduced me to her when I was in LA last time. She goes, yeah, and you know who she's getting married to, right? And I go, yeah, Wayne Gretzky. And she goes, is your math working yet? And I go, so you're telling me? And she stopped me right there. She goes, yeah, Janet Jones is not marrying Wayne Gretzky to live in Edmonton, Alberta. And
Great.
and so I had insider trading information. And so I went and negotiated a deal with the Kings and the Canucks and convinced my boss that Peter, that this was a good idea. And even if the trade didn't manifest itself, that we'd break even, which we were at just over break even when the trade happened on, I want to say August 1st or 2nd. And then we sold out the other 40% of the arena in 6 hours. I always had a nickname Etz, but then it became Etzky as in Gretzky.
Oh, I'm going to save that in my phone for you.
Uh,
And so, how long you had your own agency, actual agency, until 2018 when you took over this position? And again, can you talk a little bit about the mind shift for you from owning your own agency to jumping into an opportunity that I would argue in 2017 it's not the same as it is now? And it was called something else, correct? It wasn't sport.
yeah, it's called the Oregon Sports Authority. I think that career path continued from Jacobson. I felt like I was young and I was ascending. I wanted more. I looked around me. The president of the agency was significantly older than me, but not even close to retirement age. So I was probably in my early 30s then, and he was in his early 50s. And we're a small 15, 20, 25 person agency. I can't remember exactly the size. I was hitting my head on the ceiling. So I just felt I had to go somewhere else to broaden my horizons. So I had an opportunity to go to work with John Spolstra at the New Jersey Nets at the time. He was the president. And I actually would have had Brett Yormark and Howie Newchow and Scott Carmichael reporting to me. I interviewed all of them
Oh,
in my
really?
interview. Yeah, to be VP of Marketing Sales back in the Nets. And then I got approached right as I was about ready to pull the trigger on saying yes and moving to New York or New Jersey to a company called Regency Productions owned by the Pritzker family. And it was a big event producer, worked on Ryder Cup, PGA Championship, Super Bowl, Final Four, NBA All-Star Week, all that kind of stuff, and America's Cup. And the job was to open a West Coast office in LA. So I'm looking at LA or Hoboken,
Yeah,
and
right.
I
Yeah.
went that way and did that for 2 years, and then had the opportunity to start my agency. Someone approached me about taking a job back in Portland, managing the LPGA tournament for a small nonprofit. Wasn't interested in going to work for a small nonprofit at that point. I thought I was involved in some pretty cool deals, and I was. And then, but they reframed it 6 months later. What if you start your own agency and we're your first client? And that was the start of me getting into being an entrepreneur in 1995, and started my agency out of my living room of the house I still owned in Tigard. And over the years, I had it for 23 years. After 4 or 5 years, 3 or 4 years, I hired my brother to be a salesperson for us. He was 10 years younger than me, and we just built this thing over the 23 years I was there. And we were lucky. We were small. We had our breaks and we had our bad breaks. It's pretty vulnerable. You own an agency, you know what it's like out there. And I'm pretty proud that the agency still exists. I don't own it anymore, but for 23 years, most 90% of startups don't make it 3 years, and 90% of those survivors don't make it 10 years. And so if I look at those metrics, and then I look at, we were pretty small, nimble, 15 to 25 person, depending on the moment, size agency, to win clients that the agency still holds, like ESPN and college football playoff, Coast Conference and Vegas Bowl, and go down the list. We had a big corporate relationship with Safeway before they merged with Albertsons. They were the number two grocer in the country, and we did all their sports, entertainment, and culture stuff nationally. 2,700 store chain. I look back at that and I go, wow, for some incredible experiences. There was a lot of pain because sometimes you are on the brink of an exit being acquired, and then either '08 economic
Yeah. Wow. Yeah.
crisis, or our biggest client getting merging and then basically getting swallowed by a much smaller merge partner because the private equity followed that, and they were 40% of our revenue, and we were also just on the edge of being acquired. They weren't going to be life changing. They would have been incredible exits and led to something else, but those things didn't happen. And but I don't look at that as a failure just because you didn't have an exit. I look like you just have to step back and look at what the collective team yourself accomplished when you didn't. You're probably the lowest capitalized competitor out there, and who are these guys from Portland, Oregon, being, I think today Etzel Agency is the only agency still doing business with CFP that was an original
Oh,
agency
wow.
2013. So I think that's a massive testament to the work the agency does. But then 2017, I got approached about by a couple board members of what was the Oregon Sports Authority, which is the sports commission for the city and state, and a pretty small, sleepy nonprofit, had a lot of episodic nice wins in its first 25 years of history. But really, the decade prior of me arriving had really gotten boat raced by the industry. We weren't winning our fair share of the opportunity pie. We weren't equipped to win. We weren't funded to win. And I had the privilege of working with a lot of, in working on Super Bowls or college football playoffs. You work with the local sports commission, and pretty strong value propositions, relevance, impact. They all were really outcome based, and come home. And our agency had been a member investor for 23 years in Oregon Sports Authority because we believed in the mission. I had been on the board probably 20, now 25 years ago for a 2 or 3 year cycle. So cared about the deal, but we always come back to Portland and said, man, like, we're not punching our weight. We're not, we got to have a better value proposition. But I also think it was we were one of the top sports commissions in the 90s and early 2000s, but also at the time, I think the board and leadership just they were in a bubble and they didn't really know how quickly the whole industry had evolved. And sports tourism over the last 15 years has been the fastest segment of tourism growth nationally. It's a $140 billion a year industry just in the US around participatory sports tourism. So think all the travel tournaments and the
Soccer and basketball, and yeah.
everything. And then if you add in spectator sports tourism, which is the destination sports events that people travel to and so forth, that's another 90 to $100 billion industry annually. And nothing in tourism grew at that rate, any segment of it, except for sports. And I got approached for a job that I wasn't looking for because I had my own company. How could I walk away from what I founded? And I wasn't dissatisfied. It was a challenge, it was a grind, but I also got a lot of fulfillment out of it. So I wasn't really interested at first, and because I didn't know the board, what the board wanted. And but then some people worked me over and some people I really respect, mentor wise, friend wise, that are in and around the industry of sports or in and around the business leadership of Portland and Oregon said, hey, you need a new challenge. And this would be a heck of a challenge, obviously, but I wouldn't be talking to you if we didn't think you were the right guy to do this. And then my wife, long walk and talk up 23rd Avenue after dinner with her, and she just stopped and I think she gave me a swift kick to the rear end. You need to do this. And Carmen said that. And you don't know you need a change, but you need a change. You need a new challenge. And I was in my, I don't know, 54, 55 at the time. And when it got positioned as you can write a new chapter or write a new book and still watch the book that you're currently in or writing continue on. Your brother is totally capable of running the agency, and maybe this is a great opportunity for him to be step into his potential or and so forth. And then you get to go and be energized by what's even though it's a 25-year-old organization, be energized of being in a startup mode again and trying to build something. And so I applied on the last day, and then I was one of 77. I was the 77th applicant at that point. So 11 interviews later and 3 months later, I was awarded. I got pretty competitive. I started to get quite irritated that there was going to be another round of interviews. I wasn't expecting them to hand me the job, but the way I had been approached, I expected
Not 11 interviews.
not 11 interviews. I must have been pretty bad at the interviews, unconvincing, and that created some skeptics or something. But I never looked back. I remember walking up the stairs the very first day because we were in this old 120-year-old house and it was on the third floor of the offices. And that was one of the first deals, get an office, a real office that we're in the economic development business. And if there's no one that we were trying to sell on Portland or Oregon that you would ever take into that place for a meeting. I never held a meeting there in 2 years until I identified the new office.
Right.
But I was walking up the stairs and I'm going, what in the hell did I just do? Oh my God, am I nuts? And then sat down there by myself for about an hour before anybody else got in. And there wasn't a lot of other people to come in. There was 3 other employees. And then I just here we go. Let's go. And very entrepreneurial again, and let's go get it. And yeah, it's been a fun, it's just coming up at the end of December. It'll be 8 complete years, which I
Oh, wow.
cannot believe. It feels like it was yesterday, but it also feels like a long time ago too. 'Cause it's been fun.
And talk about the growth. And two questions. Number one is when people hear sports commission,
Yeah.
people know what it means, but could you explain what Sport Oregon actually does in terms of from a mission statement?
Yeah, it is quite an elevator pitch because we need a really tall building or a slow elevator. But the mission of Sport Oregon as a sports commission is to drive economic and then positive quality of life and social impacts in Oregon communities through sport. And then we also have so it's a 501c6 nonprofit organization, member-driven association. So we're funded by our memberships and their annual investment. And then we also have a 501c3 foundation and that mission for our community work. And that mission is for our foundation is breaking down barriers to physical activity for underserved youth communities, all about health, wellness, lifetime fitness, outcomes. We have two initiatives inside that called Chief Lives, which is all around the inequities for young girls, young women, and get more girls in the game, keep them in the game, which has been an issue. And then lifetime health and wellness, get more female coaches. That would create better outcomes for keeping girls in the game. They can't see, but they can't be what they can't see. And then
Right.
we just launched in June a second initiative called Play Oregon, which is all kids. But back to what a sports commission is for us, it's really this thing called sports tourism. And it's about pursuing rights holders that move their events around the country to compete and win those and book those room nights, contract them, drive an economic impact. So if we have an IndyCar race that we got in 2018 that's still here, the economic impact of that race weekend is probably in the 10 to $14 million on that weekend, depending on what kind of metrics you use. NASCAR, a similar outcome, Formula E, all things that we help recruit here with our partners at Green Savvy Racing, the promoters. If it's NCAA opening rounds for men's and women's or women's super regional, or we won the 2030 Final Four. I mean, that 2030 Final Four, that will be Portland's Super Bowl because we don't have the big NFL stadium to host all-star games, etc. That is going to be our Final Four. That's a $30 million a week economic impact wise for Portland. Even a small youth tournament, think a girls fast pitch softball, 11 to 14-year-old tournament coming in with, say, 80 teams can drive several thousand room nights on a weekend, and also economic impacts of $500,000 in a community on a given weekend with these travel tournaments. So we had artistic swimming in here 2 years ago, U.S. Swimming, and they had their junior championships, U.S. championships here out of Mount Hood Community College, and it was 4,000 contracted room nights. It was almost just under a $4 million economic impact
Wow.
conservatively. We're going to host USA Fencing this summer in July of 26, and it's 11,000 contracted room nights, biggest fencing
Wow.
tournament in the world. It'll take up every square inch of the convention center. So it's really, we're very tied to the hospitality industry, the hotel industry. We are the second largest aggregator of contracted room nights in the metro area behind the convention center. We're a distant second, but sports is a major producer of vibrancy and vitality in that community, economically and otherwise. And then so those everybody sees the big shiny things we go after, the big car races or the Final Fours or super regionals, but there's a million other events that cascade underneath that aren't really spectator driven, some of them. We're now in the midst of a very first economic impact study for the state
Oh, great.
in sports with Eco Northwest, which is the most highly regarded economic consultant on the coast. And so super excited about releasing that report. We're putting the finishing touches on it now. That's really important to us. Looking about creating a vision for facility infrastructure. Here we are, the global epicenter of the sports product universe with Nike and Adidas and Columbia Sportswear and a myriad of others here. It's amazing. God gave us these mountains and rivers and oceans and all this stuff. So the kind of God-given environment to play is pretty phenomenal. There's probably only three or four other states that have as good a natural playgrounds as we do in the entire country. But our built environment, fields and courts and stuff for kids and adults and families to compete and play on, safe places to play, we're really lacking. We're in the bottom 10 of states. And so trying to create vision around how do we build new facilities that will drive economic impacts, but also that important quality of life and social impact that we're talking about. And this pay for play sports model it's a huge industry, but it's also cursed too, because a lot of kids just can't afford access. But if we have these places to play, then we can work with local nonprofits and program stuff for the underserved youth communities to level up the opportunity playing field for them and create these things that right now there's just not enough quality fields. There's no consistency to it. So it's very hard to get these kids engaged in kind of the meaningful opportunities that wealthier families have created for their kids. That's a big outcome that we're trying to do and so when you start doing that game, and then also franchise recruitment, WNBA. Here we got a new owner of the Blazers coming in, Tom Dundon, and trying to work with our friends at the Blazers, who are a major partner of ours, to how do we work on a public financing model for master renovation of the Moda Center or a new building, whatever that might be. The pursuit, oh, since I've been here, we've been pursuing Major League Baseball with the Portland Diamond Project. Or are we leading it? No, but we're a key advocate, partner, back channel,
Of course.
whatever, testifying to legislature around the $800 million funding package. So we're pretty evident pretty quick that we needed to be relevant and trusted with the policymakers, both at City Hall, in the metro region, and then statewide. So we started with the city, I call it external affairs, and just like starting to build our political capital. And that is about showing up in the room, consistently being there, being trusted. Don't be a hype machine or this or that. And so it's been really interesting. That's really paid off over the last couple of years. And to where now, like, we're sought out for opinions by political leadership across the city and the state. Our wins are their wins. We're serving them up to them. It's about making our community better, et cetera. And we want them to make good decisions and be informed around things, whether it's about how do we help with financing for the Moda Center, or the opportunities around baseball if that were to happen, and everything in between. A lot there.
Yeah, no, I look, it seems like everywhere you've been, whether it be being a timber broker, Louisiana Pacific, then starting your own agency, and then now obviously everything you've done at Sport Oregon, everything you do, you've elevated. How, if you were given advice, what are some principles that you live by in order to do that? Because again, it's proof is in the pudding, and I think people are always interested of how does one come in and elevate an organization time and time again.
I just learned a lot from my parents, were a big influence on me. They instilled in me the principles of honesty, integrity, all those things, and loyalty, but also just work ethic. The summer of after sixth grade, I started working. I worked every summer until I graduated. Full-time jobs, worked. They weren't easy jobs either. I started with picking berries, and then my own landscape deal, and then working grounds and building maintenance at the University of Portland. But just, yeah, that work ethic, but also having a father that was a Division I athletic director, but he was also Division I athletic director at one of the smallest Division I schools in the country with one of the smallest budgets. And I understood and learned pretty quickly, you might not have the biggest budget, you may not have the most resources, but control what you can control, make those elements as strong and as good as you can make them. And then you can compete. You can compete if you're under-resourced. You can be the University of Portland and beat the Ducks or the Beavers. You're probably not going to beat them even 50% of the time, but you can get your own fair share. And just so that was a big thing, was work ethic, focus, control what you can control. Then once you do that, other things start to break your way. And then to be creative, entrepreneurial, don't take no for an answer, all those kind of mantras that you hear out there. And then everywhere I worked, really, even the Louisiana Pacific was one of the largest timber and lumber producing companies in the world, but they had a sports division. What the heck? It was a two-person division. And I remember working with people at IMG and ProServe and Advantage International back in the day. And what are you guys doing in this? And we just had a CEO that loves sport. And then I
Yeah.
go to a small production company owned by a high-profile PGA Tour player, but it wasn't Jack Nicklaus and it wasn't Arnold Palmer. It was Peter Jacobson from Portland, Oregon, who won 7 times on the tour and was a great ambassador for the state, and still is very active and broadcast personality as he's 70 years old now, on Golf Channel and NBC. But we were the little engine that could, and we produced a model event that every was the envy of the golf world in Portland, Oregon, with Fred Meyer as our title sponsor. And so just, and then I got to work in the big time for a pretty good sized corporation, but they weren't completely sports focused. They also owned Hyatt Hotels and Royal Caribbean Cruise Lines. They did own Spectacor and Ticketmaster. They were pretty big stakeholders in those at the time. Regency took me up a level of leverage and access, and I just learned that. And then going back and start a company in my living room. So again, this kind of, it wasn't the best LPGA event in the country. That was the LPGA in 1995, wasn't exactly on a great trajectory. And we took over an event that had, we're contracted by the foundation that owned it, Tournament Golf Foundation, that they were doing $600,000 in revenue. And I can look back now. And from 1995 to when that relationship ended in 2005, we went from $600,000 and maybe $25,000 to charity locally. And it was a nice local event that had long history. It's actually the longest standing women's professional competition event in the United States, 50 something years now. But we went from $600,000 in one tournament to two tournaments, in one in Portland, one in Phoenix, producing 14 plus million dollars in revenue, highest attended events on the LPGA tour, the biggest charity events on the LPGA tour. Those two events generated two to $2.5 million for charity, and were accounted for almost 40% of the charitable dollars generated by the tour from two
Ah,
events. And their highest attended events, I would say they were the most dynamic events outside the majors. And then so that was a pretty grad. And it wasn't like we brought in Safeway as title sponsor. And then I always like to say we had the team to deliver. Safeway empowered us to be great because of the investment level they made. But like I also step back and I go, they probably would not have invested if and kept raising that investment if we weren't delivering
yeah, of
great
course.
forums. I sometimes I sell ourselves short, but I think our team just did an unbelievable job of bringing passion and thought leadership and innovation, and it was fun to crush it for those 10 years and just be on a incredible updraft with the tour and with our partners at Tournament Golf Foundation.
For you, and again, I want to do a lightning round and I want to be cognizant of your time because I know you're chief
It's all
executive
good.
of
I got time for you,
Oregon.
Taylor.
Okay, good. All right, we're gonna do lightning round.
Yep,
Favorite and just give a one word answer or why, whatever you want. Favorite sporting event you've ever attended?
that's a hard one because I've been to so many great ones. Geez, you got me right there. I'll give you the greatest sports moment, and I don't know why, but it was so uniquely Oregon. And it was in the 2008 Olympic trials at Hayward Field that we were producing at the agency, everything outside the event, outside the competition. And Nick Simmons, I got a picture right to my right here on the wall of Nick Simmons and Andrew Weeding. And I hate saying, I forget the third guy's name. He's with the Oregon Track Club. A 1-2-3 finish in the 800. Nick Simmons from your alma mater, Willamette
I was
University.
gonna say Willamette University
Hey,
alum.
but this guy is, there's nothing about him in the starting blocks that says this guy is going to be at the lead of the field. But he had a heart of just massive heart and just he, the finish of him coming from behind the pack around the final turn of the 800. You got to be a crazy person to run the 800. It is a full 2 lap sprint, and the crowd, it was deafening, and just the vibe, that was one of the great moments. I got to throw one more in, even though we lost, but Timbers 2001 MLS Cup, his goal at death. Frank, and you were here then, Taylor, but this city had been through a death march between the social unrest and COVID,
And the
and
media really, how they
it
portrayed Portland as.
it was brutal. And all of a sudden, the Timbers made a magical run. We hosted MLS Cup as a mid seed. I think we were a 5 seed or something like that. So this the break to get the MLS Cup and get through was crazy. And then we're down in New York FC, and then Mora at the death scores this goal. And it was probably just in Portland, Oregon, the craziest moment of euphoria that I had been a part of. The place was shaking, people were shaking, they couldn't stop. Then it goes to, then all of a sudden the final whistle blows, and then we're in the pause before overtime. But it was a moment that Portland needed. It was the most cathartic moment that I've ever seen sports deliver for a community. It was like, we can hope again, we can live again, even though we ended up losing in overtime the cup. Portland needed that, and I never forget the physical sensation of that moment, and it lasted for minutes afterwards.
No, it's so funny that you say that because I say the same thing about I've worked at a lot of different places, but that moment where he scored at, to your point, at the death. And number one, for us to even get there, we had to have six people lose. We had to
Yeah.
win on the road. And the day that the MLS Cup, it was like such a terrible day. It was just
Cold,
raining.
wet.
Yeah, yeah.
Stadium was packed and
Stadium
people,
was rocking. I know, and it was like I remember talking to you afterwards, and it was just such an emotional roller coaster. But that's what is great about sports, right? And like,
sports. Yep.
you know,
That's why sports binds communities. It
exactly.
unifies communities. It doesn't matter your politics in today's world. We all have a kid out on the field, whether it's a youth game that we're rooting for and or it's our team out there. And it just brings communities together. It's a sense of pride and so many other things. So it's just, yeah. Sorry, that's not exactly lightning round answer.
No, that was good. That was good. Favorite Oregon sports figure? That
Favorite.
could be player, coach, executive. Can't pick Peter Jacobson though.
No, I won't. Even though he's up there. Undervalued or underrecognized icon. Favorite sports personality. There's different categories for different people, right? And I'll give it to a guy that's not an athlete, but he is a personality. And he creatively and sometimes shamelessly weaves in Oregon connection all the time. But he just puts a smile on a lot of people's face. Is Neil Everett. And
Oh, yeah.
yeah.
Neil's great.
And he retired ESPN Sports Center anchor. That's not the fairest answer from an athlete perspective. I'll go to a guy, fierce competitor, and just I don't want to say he doesn't know how to lose, but he refuses to lose. And that's Pat Casey. He played for my dad at University of Portland in baseball. He even walked on and played and ended up starting a few games on a really good basketball team that had three NBA players on it for Portland. Got drafted. I played basketball for him. He was the player coach of an AU team, City League team, and we won a couple state titles. And it was all these guys that graduated. Four of them were professional baseball players or were really good basketball players in the off season. And then what he did at Oregon State, no one thought anybody from the Pacific Northwest would ever win a national title in baseball. And he won three of them, just built a powerhouse and it brought baseball back at Oregon where they believe, and they're a contender to go to the World Series now. University of Portland, Portland always had a solid program, but that even though Casey hated losing to his alma mater and never allowed it, I think they only beat him twice in 50 tries. But UP elevated because of the kids all of a sudden said, you can win in the Pacific Northwest. It elevated the University of Washington's baseball program. And all of a sudden now the Northwest is forced to be reckoned with in college baseball. But what he did to win three national titles, I don't know if there was ever something farther from anyone's imagination of possibility than what he did. And he's just a fierce competitor
No, that's well
and
said.
a good human.
Where is Sport Oregon in 5 years?
I want to say double what we are now. And we've, in the last, been here 8 years, last 4 or 5 years, we've tripled almost every KPI metric of success, whether it's revenue, whether it's on the tourism side, how many room nights we book annually to our community impact with our foundation now. We've given more money away in 3 years of our last 3 years of our foundation that was given in the first 31 years of the foundation. We have this past to wrap the year we're wrapping up right now, we brought 28 new investors, annual investors, corporations involved, unprecedented. When I started, I got the biggest we not I. We got the biggest board that I know of. We have 147 board members. They're all annual investors, but when I started, we were in the 40s and we added 100. And it's a room everybody wants to be in. And I think we'll add 25 more next year. And because we're getting outcomes and we're the place to be, and people see the results that we're getting, and people want to be a part of success. Portland is having and Oregon is having more than we were saying we're having sports is having a moment. I think it's much more than a moment. I think sports and arts and culinary will lead Portland back in downtown revitalization. So all those things I think just add up to us staying on an upward trajectory. I don't think we're recession proof, but we are resilient and we'll be able to manage through economic headwinds because we're getting outcomes that are needed in the community. It might slow us down a little bit, but yeah, excited for the future.
Okay, last question. You've been a leader at multiple places from your own company and obviously now at Sport Oregon. What's one leadership principle you swear by?
Surround yourself with great people and don't get in their way. Don't micromanage. My greatest pride is the and nothing hurts more than losing a great teammate to a because you're always like that fear of, oh man, now how am I going to replace them or whatever. But at the same time, because I was a small agency owner and now small nonprofit leader, our job is to identify great talent, bring them in here, give them the space and the resources to go win and the leadership and vision to go in, and then let them turn them loose. And you're also going to lose a lot of your flock is going to eventually fly away because if they're good, they're going to start hitting the ceiling. And we're not going to double and triple in headcount size here. And for that next opportunity, they're going to have to go somewhere else. And it hurts the moment to lose them. But the thing I look at is I probably have 50, what I'll call alumni that are my agency, our agency birth, or creating an opportunity, a stepping stone, a moment opportunity for them to build resume experience, then to go on to something much greater. And then the same thing here. In 8 years, we've probably lost 10, 12 people. They've all gone on to bigger and better opportunities. And so I take a lot of pride in that, watching their success happen somewhere else, and that I somehow didn't get in the way of them as a leader, but maybe create an environment for them to find themselves and be inspired and go get it. Yeah, I take a lot of pride in the talent that I've been able to work with, the type of people I've been able to work with, and what they've gone on to achieve. I think that is pretty gratifying to me as a leader.
Yeah, of course. Look, I mean, I thank you for the help you've given me throughout my career. Obviously, thank you for coming on this podcast, but also I know your employees thank you, and also the state of Oregon thanks you. So again, you're a dynamic figure and titan of the industry in Oregon, and I'm really excited for people to hear this one. Jim, thank you so much for joining, and I want to be cognizant of your time. But
Thank you for the opportunity. And
this is
so
fantastic.
sometimes taking these pauses and having conversations like this are good kind of level sets or resets. And because we're all competitive, sometimes we get frustrated with pace of outcomes or lack of outcomes or whatever. But then if you stop and smell the roses and kind of do a rewind a little bit, it's okay. We are making a difference.
Pretty remarkable. Yeah.
And then it's like a little bit of a recharge. I'm going to hang up with you and be all fired up and go out
Good.
with the team. And here we go. Let's strap it on. Let's go get some more wins. But here we go.
Well,
And
that's
it's been
great, Jim.
fun to see what you've done. I got to give you credit. I know we talked about it, like for, you left for a pretty promising, you left the Timbers and went down and pursued pretty incredible opportunity with MMA and the ownership group there. And that organization been a rocket ship. But then the work that you did and the outcomes you did created an opportunity. Maybe you didn't know it at the time, but like for you to where people respected what you had to offer professionally to want to retain you to drive their strategy around sponsorship, investment, sports, any number of different things, and then to have the guts to go hang your shingle. And it's pretty gratifying
I remember
to watch you see that have the success, and I think it's been gratifying to you and a learning deal. Wow, and do
yeah,
it. So that's
I was
cool.
talking about that the other day. I remember talking to you like 2 years ago. And I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing next. And you're like, you ever thought about starting your own agency? I'm like, no, I'm not going to do
Yeah.
that. And starting it, and it's been a little over a year. And like to your point, you look back and say, I'm only looking back now because I had a meeting with my accountant. So
It's that time of year.
yeah, but no, to your point, you get it. You hung your name on your agency, and hanging your own name, it's gratifying, but a little scary at the same
Yeah,
time.
it's scary. It never gets unscary. Let's put it that way. But it's a good motivator.
Yeah,
You
100%.
can only look at yourself in the mirror.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, which
Yeah,
is good or bad. I don't
yeah,
depends
that's
on how you
yeah,
look
it's,
at
yeah.
it. But no, Jim, again, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
All right, man. Go get them.